The crystal towers of Thalara shone under twin suns, reflecting 1,000 shades of blue and silver. Princess Lyrene stood on the highest balcony, her silver robe fluttering in the soft wind. From here she could see the endless spires of her city, the floating gardens and the shimmering bridges that linked sky to sky. It was a perfect world, untouched by the roughness of Earth. Yet her heart was not calm. Today, a human was coming. Her father, Emperor Soral, had spoken of peace. After centuries of fear, the Alari Empire and Earth's Union were finally going to meet face to face. To the Emperor, it was a symbol of unity. To Lyrene, it was a nightmare she couldn't escape. All her life she had heard stories about humans. The way her tutors described them made her skin crawl, creatures of war, reckless beings who fought even among themselves. They said humans destroyed their own world before reaching the stars. They said human hands carried death. Their words were full of deceit and their eyes burned like weapons. Every child on Thalara was taught to avoid them. Lyrene believed those stories. She remembered the first time she saw an image of a human soldier. It was during her studies in the Hall of Records. The projection showed a tall figure in armor, holding a weapon that could vaporize a wall. The soldier's face was hidden behind a dark helmet. Her teacher explained that this was what humans looked like when they fought. Emotionless, merciless, unstoppable. From that day on, even the idea of standing near one filled her with cold dread. Now one of them was coming to her home. The palace buzzed with preparation. Diplomats rehearsed greetings, attendants cleaned every hall, and guards checked every path twice. Lyrene moved quietly through the corridors, trying to avoid attention. Her handmaids whispered about the visitor. "A real human here," one said. "Do you think he breathes the same air?" asked another. Lyrene said nothing. Her golden eyes were full of worry. She visited the mirror chamber to calm herself. The room reflected 100 versions of her, tall, elegant, with the silver hair of her people flowing down her back. She looked strong, royal, unshakable, but inside she was frightened. What if the stories were true? What if the human reached out to her? Would his touch burn her skin as the old tales claimed? She tried to steady her breath. "He is only a guest," she whispered. "A guest for peace." Still, her heart refused to listen. The sound of drums echoed through the palace. The human ship had landed. Through the window she saw the silver vessel resting in the royal courtyard. Unlike any craft her people built, it looked rough and powerful, made of dark metal with battle scars along its sides. She wondered if those marks were from wars humans had fought, or survived. Her father's voice boomed through the hall. "Daughter, it is time." Lyrene stepped beside him as the great doors opened. The delegation entered, humans and diplomats from other allied worlds. But it was the soldier who caught her eyes first. He was taller than any Alari, his frame strong but calm. His armor was simple compared to their glowing robes. His eyes, unlike the cold metal mask she imagined, were steady and human, brown, not burning, and full of quiet focus. When he bowed to the Emperor, his movements were precise, respectful. Lyrene froze. Every part of her wanted to move away. She felt her pulse in her throat as he looked up and met her gaze for the first time. It was only a glance and a second at most, but it felt like forever. She saw no rage, no wild power, just a tired calm, as if he had seen too much of life and carried it in silence. Still, her fear returned in waves. She stepped back before he could come closer. Her attendants noticed, exchanging quick looks. The soldier said nothing. The Emperor smiled politely. "Captain Elias Ward of Earth's Union," he announced. "Protector of peace and hero of the Battle of Korm. He will serve as personal guard to this summit." Elias bowed again, his voice steady. "Your Majesty." "It is an honor." The sound of his voice startled her. It wasn't harsh or strange. It was deep, calm, almost kind. But Lyrene couldn't trust it. She turned her head, pretending to study the banners above the hall. She didn't want him to see the fear in her eyes. The meeting continued for hours with speeches about unity and progress. Lyrene said nothing. She could feel the human's presence even from across the room. When he moved, his footsteps were quiet but firm. When he stood guard, his eyes scanned the crowd, not her. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he noticed her unease. When the talks ended, Lyrene hurried back to her private garden. She sat by the glowing fountain, letting her fingers drift through the water. Her reflection rippled with every movement. showing a girl torn between fear and curiosity. She remembered the way he bowed, the way he spoke. There had been no threat, no arrogance, and only patience. Still, the voice of her childhood echoed in her head. Never trust a human. Their kindness is a trick. As the night fell over the shining towers of Thalera, Lyrene looked up at the stars. Somewhere among them, Earth spun, the home of the being she was supposed to meet again tomorrow. The thought made her heart tighten. She didn't want to see him again, but a small part of her, one she didn't understand, whispered that maybe not all stories were true, and that single thought, quiet and fragile, was enough to keep her awake until dawn. Morning light poured through the glass arches of the palace. Princess Lyrene had not slept. Her thoughts were tangled with the image of the human soldier, Captain Elias Ward. She tried to convince herself that the curiosity inside her was just anxiety. Yet the memory of his calm voice and the way he bowed refused to fade. The Emperor had arranged another round of talks with Earth's delegation that day. Lyrene had no choice but to attend. She dressed in a flowing gown of pale silver and covered her trembling hands with gloves, as if even the thought of being near a human required protection. When she entered the royal chamber, Elias was already there, standing near the tall windows that looked over the shining city. His armor gleamed softly under the morning sun. He turned when she arrived, and for a brief second their eyes met again. He nodded politely, saying nothing. Lyrene quickly took her seat beside her father. She tried not to glance his way, but her mind was restless. She kept wondering what kind of world he came from. Did humans really live in cities of smoke and iron, as the stories said? Did they really fight from the moment they were born? The meeting began with formal greetings. Human diplomats spoke about trade routes, cooperation, and shared defense. Lyrene listened quietly, but she noticed something different about the humans' tone. They spoke with respect, not dominance. Their words carried a wish for peace, not control. Every time someone moved, Elias's eyes scanned the room, watchful but never cold. His movements were disciplined, like water flowing around danger. He didn't speak unless spoken to. The calm strength he carried made even the palace guards take note. During a short break, Lyrene walked alone to the side corridor to clear her head. The golden vines that decorated the walls shimmered in the soft air. She thought she was alone until she heard a faint sound, the voice of someone humming. Turning a corner, she saw Elias kneeling beside a small cleaning droid that had broken down. He wasn't supposed to be there. Guards rarely repaired machines. Yet he had removed a panel and was fixing the inner circuits with care. The little droid's blinking lights flickered weakly, and Elias smiled as if talking to a friend. "Stay still, little one," he murmured. "Almost done." Lyrene froze. No one spoke kindly to droids. They were tools, not companions. But the human spoke as if the machine had feelings. When he finished, the droid whirred back to life and chirped happily before rolling away. Elias noticed her then. He stood at once and saluted. "Forgive me, Princess. It wasn't my place to interfere." She shook her head slightly, still surprised by what she'd seen. "You repaired it?" "It looked frightened," he said simply. "And it reminded me of my dog back on Earth." Her eyes widened. "Your dog?" He smiled faintly. "A loyal creature. Always tried to fix my mood even when I didn't deserve it." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. His words carried warmth, a softness that didn't match the cold image she had of humans. She wanted to ask more, but her voice refused to leave her lips. She turned and left quickly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. That evening, she sat with her tutor in the Hall of Records, but she couldn't focus. The human's face kept appearing in her thoughts. His kindness, his patience, the way he helped the broken droid, it didn't fit the old tales. Her tutor noticed her distraction. "You seem troubled, Princess," he said gently. She hesitated before speaking. "Teacher, is it possible the stories about humans were wrong?" The old scholar frowned. "The stories are truth passed down from those who suffered, child. Humans are dangerous, but what if some are not?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long time. "You have a soft heart, Your Highness. Be careful. Empathy can be a blade in politics." She nodded, but deep inside, her heart whispered something else. Maybe truth wasn't always what history said. Later that night, as the twin moons rose, Lyrene walked alone through the royal garden. The air smelled of glowing lilies and silver moss. She stopped when she saw a figure standing at the edge of the garden, looking up at the stars. It was Elias again. He heard her approach and turned. "Can't sleep either, Princess?" She hesitated. "You shouldn't be here without permission." He smiled softly. "Then consider it a mistake I'll correct in a minute." There was no arrogance in his tone, only honesty. She found herself walking closer. "You look at the stars as if they mean something." "They do," he replied. "Every one of them reminds me that we humans are still learning how small we are." His words were unexpected. Lyrene looked up too. The sky shimmered with hundreds of constellations, the same ones her ancestors had feared humans would one day invade. But beside this man, they didn't feel threatening anymore. She finally asked, "Do you believe peace is possible?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Peace is not built in meetings, Princess. It's built when two people stop fearing each other." Her chest tightened. She didn't know why those words touched her so deeply. A soft wind brushed past them. The garden lights flickered, casting silver shadows between the flowers. Elias stepped back respectfully, keeping his distance. He bowed again, his eyes gentle but serious. "Rest well, Your Highness. Tomorrow will be another long day." As he left, Lyrene stood beneath the stars, unable to move. Her heart was still afraid, but not in the same way as before. It was a new kind of feeling, something she couldn't name yet. For the first time, the human's touch was no longer the thing she feared most. It was his kindness that unsettled her now, because she had no defense against it. The next morning arrived bright and quiet, but something in the air felt different. Even the palace guards, usually calm and proud, looked uneasy. Princess Lyrene felt it too, a weight in the silence like the sky was holding its breath. The conference chamber shimmered with banners of peace. Leaders from both the Aelari Empire and Earth's Union filled the long glass hall. At the far end, Emperor Saral spoke about trust and a future without fear. Lyrene sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And near the main doors, Captain Elias Ward stood at attention, his armor faintly reflecting the morning light. She tried not to look at him, but her eyes found him again and again. He was still silent and watchful. Every move he made seemed careful, never loud, never proud. It was strange how someone she once feared now made her feel safe, though she refused to admit it. As her father's speech continued, the large glass panels behind the stage flickered for a moment. Lyrene noticed it, but no one else did. Then a faint hum filled the air. The lights dimmed. In the next instant, a deafening explosion shattered the silence. The glass walls burst inward, throwing shards like rain. Aelari guards fell and chaos flooded the hall. Smoke poured through the cracks, filling the air with the scent of burning metal. Screams echoed from every side. Lyrene froze. Her ears rang and her heart pounded so hard she couldn't breathe. From the smoke came figures, masked intruders wearing armor painted with the symbol of the old Aelari war faction. They shouted that peace with humans was a betrayal, that Thalara would not bow to Earth. Lyrene's father rose, shouting orders, but the attackers were fast. Energy blasts tore through the chamber. A bolt hit near the princess, sending her tumbling from her chair. She hit the floor hard, gasping. When she opened her eyes, she saw a shadow moving through the smoke, tall, human, and calm amid the fire. Elias. He moved with quiet speed, pulling her up before another blast struck. His gloved hand wrapped around her arm, firm but gentle. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice sharp but steady. She wanted to scream that she couldn't move, that she was too afraid, but something in his eyes stopped her. They weren't cold or wild. They were focused. He turned toward the attackers, drawing a compact shield generator from his belt. A transparent barrier flashed into place just as another energy bolt struck. The shield flared bright blue, deflecting the blast with a hiss. Lyrene crouched behind him, trembling. "They're from our world," she whispered. "They'll kill everyone." "Not if I can help it," he said. His tone was firm, not arrogant, simply certain. He moved like lightning, scanning the hall, pushing fallen debris aside to clear a path. "Stay close," he ordered. When she hesitated, he glanced back at her. "Trust me, Princess." That word, trust, echoed in her ears. The smoke grew thicker. Blinding flashes lit the chamber as security forces fought back. Elias's armor took a few hits, sparks flying off, but he didn't slow. He guided her through the chaos, using his shield to block every strike that came too near. Then a sudden blast struck the ceiling, and a huge piece of crystal fell. Lyrene gasped as it came straight toward her. but Elias pushed her aside and caught the weight of it on his shoulder, groaning from the strain. For a moment she saw real pain on his face, but he kept holding it up until she crawled clear. Then he shoved the crystal away and stumbled forward, his arm bleeding from the impact. "Why would you do that?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Because you're not my enemy," he said simply. Before she could answer, a masked attacker charged from the smoke, weapon raised. Elias reacted first, spinning, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it aside before knocking him to the ground. It wasn't brutal. It was controlled, practiced, and quick. Another blast hit nearby, throwing them both to the ground. The world spun. Lyrene's head rang and her vision blurred. She heard voices, guards shouting, someone calling her name, but all she could see was the human crawling toward her, wounded yet still reaching out. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head weakly, though her body trembled all over. "You saved me," he gave a tired half smile. "Just doing my job." Before she could say anything more guards stormed in. The palace alarm screamed across the city. The attackers fled, disappearing into the smoke, leaving chaos behind. As silence slowly returned, Lyrene realized her hand was still in his. His armor was scorched and cracked, his face covered in soot, but his eyes, those calm brown eyes, were steady. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked down at their joined hands, then released her gently, bowing his head. "You're safe now, Princess." He turned to report to the Emperor, but Lyrene could only watch him walk away. The legends she had believed all her life felt like dust now, empty stories told by those who never met a man like this. That night, as the city repaired its broken windows and the palace echoed with rumors of the attack, Lyrene sat by her window, unable to rest. She kept seeing his face through the smoke, his hand shielding her from the blast, his words echoing in her heart. "Trust me." For the first time in her life, she did. The palace was filled with confusion and noise. Guards ran through the halls, healers rushed to the wounded, and frightened servants whispered about betrayal. The smoke from the attack still lingered in the air, clinging to every wall like a memory that refused to fade. Princess Lyrene sat beside her father in the royal chamber, her hands shaking. The Emperor's face was hard with anger. "They dared to strike during peace talks," he said. "Find who planned this." His voice echoed through the hall, but Lyrene's mind was not on the attackers. She could only think of Captain Elias Ward. She had seen him fall after shielding her from the explosion. The last thing she remembered before the guards pulled her away was the sight of him lying on the floor, blood marking the metal of his armor. Now she couldn't rest until she knew he was alive. "The human soldier saved my life," she said softly. Her father looked at her sharply. "You will not speak of him now. Many believe this was a human trap." Lyrene shook her head. "No, father. He fought for us. He stood between me and the fire." But the Emperor turned away, too burdened by anger to listen. To him, the attack was a humiliation. To her, it was something else, a moment that had changed everything. When the meeting ended, Lyrene slipped away from the guards. She moved quietly through the corridors, ignoring the whispers of courtiers. She had one destination in mind: the medical wing. The room was quiet, filled with the soft hum of healing machines and the scent of herbs. Rows of wounded soldiers lay in recovery, both Elari and human. Lyrene walked past them until she saw him. Elias lay on a low bed, his armor removed, his right arm wrapped in glowing bandages. His eyes were closed, his face pale but peaceful. Even in rest, he looked strong. The medic beside him noticed her and bowed quickly. "Your Highness, you shouldn't be here," she straightened. "I am the one he protected. I will stay." The medic hesitated, then nodded and left her alone. Lyrene stood there for a long moment, uncertain. She wanted to thank him, yet words felt too small. Slowly, she moved closer and sat beside his bed. The machines beeped softly, marking the rhythm of his heartbeat. "You saved me," she whispered. "Even when my people feared you." "Even when I feared you." Her gaze fell to his hand. It was large and rough compared to her own, the hand of someone who had lived through battles. She remembered the warmth of it when he pulled her from danger. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his fingers gently. They were warm. For the first time, the old fear didn't rise. Instead, she felt something new, calm, steady, safe. "Princess," a voice said from the doorway. It was her chief advisor, Mael. "You must return to your quarters. This is improper." She looked up, startled but firm. "Improper?" He saved the heir of the empire. Does that mean nothing? Mael frowned. There are those who believe he led the attackers here. Humans are unpredictable. Her voice grew sharp. He bled for us. How many of our own guards stood their ground like he did? The advisor bowed slightly, but his eyes were full of quiet warning. Be careful, Princess. Shall we? A favor to a human could bring trouble. She said nothing as he left, but her heart burned. The injustice stung her deeply. When Elias stirred hours later, the first thing he saw was her. His eyes blinked open slowly, confused by the light. Princess? His voice was weak, rough from exhaustion. She leaned forward quickly. You're safe. You're in the palace medical wing. He tried to sit up, but she placed a hand on his arm. Don't move. You're still hurt. He exhaled softly, wincing. I thought you were injured. I'm fine because of you, she said. You saved my life. He smiled faintly. Then I'm glad I was there. She hesitated, studying his face. Why did you do it? You could have left me. His eyes softened. Because protecting people is what I do, Princess. It doesn't matter where they're from. Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. The words felt simple, yet they carried more truth than all the speeches spoken in the great hall. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was gentle, like a pause between two breaths. Then Elias looked toward the window, where the suns were setting in shades of violet and gold. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I wish your people didn't have to see this side of peace. Lyrene shook her head. It's not your fault. He smiled, tired but kind. Still, I'll stay until it's safe. That's a promise. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, something she couldn't explain. You should rest now, she said softly. I'll make sure no one disturbs you. As she stood to leave, he whispered, Thank you, Princess. When she walked back through the quiet corridors, her heart was heavy but bright. She knew her court would never understand why she cared about a human soldier, but she also knew something had changed in her forever. The fear that had once ruled her was gone. It had burned away in the light of his courage, and deep within her something new began to grow. Something that felt like hope. For 2 days, the palace was filled with rumors. Some said the human had secretly led the attackers. Others claimed he was a spy. Only a few dared to speak the truth, that he had risked his life to save the princess. Princess Lyrene heard the whispers every time she walked through the halls. Servants bowed but avoided her eyes. Nobles stopped talking when she passed. The sound of lies followed her like a shadow. Still, she stayed silent. She was waiting. That morning, the royal council gathered in the grand chamber. The emperor sat high on his throne, his expression cold. Around him stood nobles, generals, and advisors, all ready to cast judgment. Lyrene stood beside him, her silver gown glowing under the soft light. At the center of the hall, guarded by 2 soldiers, stood Captain Elias Ward. His arm was still in a sling, and his face carried the tired look of someone who had seen too much. But he didn't bow his head. He stood tall, calm, and proud, even as the eyes of the Empire judged him. A counselor stepped forward. Your Majesty, there is no proof the human was part of the attack, he said carefully. But neither can we prove he wasn't. Should we take that risk? Another voice rose sharply. The Aelari people are afraid. They want someone to blame. Let the human leave our world before his kind brings more danger. The Emperor's fingers tightened on the armrest. Perhaps that would be best, he said slowly. Lyrene's heart dropped. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She took a step forward, her voice clear. No, father. You are wrong. The hall went still. Every head turned toward her. Her father frowned. Daughter, this is not your place. With respect it is, she said, her voice trembling but strong. That man saved my life. I would be dead if not for him. I saw him fight our own traitors while your guards fled. You call him a danger? He was the only one who stood between me and death. Gasps rippled through the room. The Emperor's face hardened, but Lyrene didn't stop. She stepped closer to the council table. You all speak of peace, she continued, but you judge him by the same lies I once believed. You say humans are monsters, but I saw courage in him, not cruelty. If we turn him away now, then we prove that the fear inside us is stronger than truth. Elias's eyes lifted to her, surprise flickering behind the calm. He hadn't expected her to speak for him. One of the generals bowed slightly. Princess, your words are noble. But fear cannot be erased in a day. The people demand safety. Lyrene looked around the hall, her voice soft but steady. Then let them learn safety from truth. Let them see that humans can protect, not just destroy. Her father's gaze met hers, heavy with conflict. You would trust this human so easily? I trust what I saw, she said. And I trust my own heart. Silence filled the room again. The Emperor finally sighed, his shoulders lowering slightly. You speak boldly, my daughter. Very well. The human will remain until the investigation is complete. But his actions will be watched. It wasn't full victory, but it was enough. Lyrene bowed slightly, her voice calm. Thank you, Father. The meeting ended soon after, and the crowd began to leave, whispering about what had just happened. When the chamber finally emptied, Lyrene turned toward Elias. You didn't have to defend me, he said quietly. Now they'll turn their anger on you. She smiled faintly. They already do. But I couldn't let them dishonor what you did. He looked at her for a long moment as if trying to understand her. You're brave, Princess, she shook her head. No, you were brave first. I only followed your example. For a brief second their eyes met and the world outside seemed to fade. Neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a quiet respect that needed no words. Later that day, Lyrene visited him again in the garden courtyard where he was recovering. The air smelled of soft rain and glowing vines. Birds of crystal feathers sang from the branches. He sat on a stone bench, his injured arm resting in a sling, watching the suns sink over the horizon. When she approached, he stood, though slowly. I didn't expect another visit, he said with a tired smile. You shouldn't stand, she replied gently. You need rest, he chuckled softly. Resting is harder than fighting. She sat beside him. You could leave if you wanted to, she said. No one would blame you. He looked out at the shining city. Maybe, but running doesn't fix anything. And if peace means something to you, then I'll stay to see it through. Her heart stirred at his words. You still trust us after everything? I trust people, not governments, he said. And I trust you. She looked down, feeling warmth rise in her cheeks. I used to think humans only brought pain. Now, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. He turned to her, his voice soft. Maybe that's the start of peace when someone begins to wonder. The garden grew quiet. The last rays of light painted the sky gold. For the first time since the attack, Lyrene felt calm. She didn't feel fear anymore. Not of him, not of change. As they sat together in silence, she realized that peace didn't begin in meetings or treaties. It began here, in small moments of understanding between two hearts that once feared each other. Days passed and peace slowly returned to the shining city of Thalara. The palace had repaired its walls, but not all wounds healed so easily. Many still whispered about the human soldier who stayed within the royal grounds, yet no one dared to act against him. Not while the princess herself defended him. Captain Elias Ward spent his days walking the palace gardens as he recovered. His right arm was still weak, but he refused to rest for long. He watched the city from the high terraces, studying the people, the airships, and the glowing towers that looked like light trapped in crystal. To him, Thalara was both beautiful and distant, like a dream made of glass. Every afternoon, Princess Lyrene joined him there. At first, their meetings were short and quiet. She brought him fruit tea. He thanked her politely, and they would sit together under the soft blue trees. But as time went on, their talks grew longer. One day, she found him sitting beside the garden pond, tossing small stones into the glowing water. She smiled softly. Humans find calm in strange things, she said. He turned to her. Throwing stones into water isn't strange. It's peaceful. Makes you forget what's heavy inside. She sat beside him. On my world, we walk through light gardens to calm our minds. We call it cleansing of thoughts, he nodded. I like that. On Earth, we just call it getting some fresh air. She laughed quietly. It was a small sound, gentle and real. It surprised him, and her too. She hadn't laughed in days. He looked at her carefully. You should laugh more often, Princess. It suits you better than fear. Her smile faded a little. Fear was all I knew once. My people told me that humans were destroyers, that even their touch brought harm. She looked down at her hands, remembering how she once trembled at the sight of him. I believed them. Until you proved them wrong. He tossed another stone into the pond. We humans have many faces, Princess. Some good, some not. But I'm glad you met the right one first. She turned to him. Why did you become a soldier? He looked at the rippling water for a moment before answering. Because someone has to stand between peace and those who would break it. I don't like war, but I know what it costs when he stands to stop it. Lyrene listened quietly. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience. You've seen many battles? She asked softly. Too many, he said. Sometimes I still hear the sounds when I close my eyes. She nodded slowly. We lost many too. That's why my people feared yours. We never saw the pain you carried, we only saw the strength. Maybe that frightened us more. Elias looked at her, and for the first time she saw something deep in his eyes. A quiet sadness mixed with understanding. Fear makes enemies out of those who could be friends, he said. But courage, that changes everything. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. The soft glow from the pond reflected in her golden eyes and his brown ones, blending light and shadow together. The silence between them felt warm, not empty. Later they walked along the garden path. The air smelled of silver blossoms and the suns were setting behind the tall towers. Lyrene broke the silence. When you go back to Earth, what will you tell your people about us? He smiled gently. I'll tell them the Elari princess is not made of glass. She's made of courage. She looked away, hiding a blush. You speak like a poet. I've been told that before, he said with a grin. Usually right before someone throws me into danger again. She laughed, shaking her head. You're strange, human. And you're curious, princess, he replied. A dangerous mix. They reached the edge of the garden where a large silver tree stood. Its roots glowed faintly like veins of light. Lyrene stopped and looked up at it. This tree is older than our empire, she said softly. It's said to bloom when hearts are at peace. Elias looked up at the branches. Then it might bloom soon, he said. Why do you say that? Because for the first time I think both of our hearts are starting to heal. Her eyes softened. For a moment she wanted to tell him how much his presence had changed her world, how he had turned her fear into faith, but she stayed quiet. The feeling didn't need words. As the night deepened, lights across the city shimmered like stars. The two of them stood beneath the glowing tree, their shadows touching but never crossing. Before leaving, Elias spoke quietly. Princess, thank you for seeing me as more than a soldier. She looked at him with warmth. And thank you for showing me that humanity is not what I was taught. He bowed slightly, smiling. Maybe one day our worlds will understand each other the way we do, she whispered. Maybe one day. He walked away slowly, leaving her beneath the tree, the light reflecting softly on her face. When she looked up, she saw a single flower bloom on the ancient branches, a soft golden petal shining in the dark. The old legends had said it bloomed only for truth. And that night it did. The day of departure came faster than anyone expected. The skies of Thalara were clear, and the great spaceport gleamed like polished silver under the twin suns. The air was heavy with quiet emotion. The humans were returning to Earth. Peace had been restored. The treaties signed, and for the first time in history, the Elari and humans had spoken without weapons between them. Princess Lyrene stood on the balcony of her private chamber, watching the ships prepare to leave. Her heart felt strangely heavy. She told herself this was a moment of celebration, a sign that her people had chosen peace, but deep inside, something felt missing. It had been several days since she last saw Captain Elias Ward. After the final council meeting, he had been kept busy helping coordinate the evacuation of the wounded and preparing his own ship for departure. She hadn't had a moment alone with him. Now, with the engines of his ship warming below, she realized how much she didn't want him to go. Her handmaids entered carrying her ceremonial robe, but she waved them away. Not today, she said softly. I do not wish to be a symbol today. I just want to say goodbye. They looked at her in surprise, but no one dared question. When she reached the royal courtyard, the human ship stood ready. Its hull was dark and strong, scarred but proud, much like the man who commanded it. The Elari guards kept their distance, still unsure of what to think of humans, but they no longer looked at them with hate, only quiet curiosity. Elias stood near the ramp speaking with his officers. His right arm was still bandaged, but he looked well enough to travel. When he saw her approach, he straightened at once and saluted. Your Highness, she smiled faintly. You don't have to do that, Captain. Not today. He lowered his hand, his expression softening. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either, she admitted. But I couldn't let you leave without saying, thank you, for everything. He looked around as if unsure what to say in front of so many watching eyes. You don't owe me thanks. I was just doing my duty. She shook her head. No, Elias, you did more than duty. You changed everything. He studied her face quietly. Your people were brave too, Princess. They stood for peace when they could have chosen hate. Maybe, she said. But they followed my voice, and my voice changed because of you. The silence between them grew gentle again, like a familiar melody. Around them, the crew continued their work, unaware of the quiet storm inside the princess's heart. She looked up at the ship, then back at him. Will you come back? He hesitated before answering. If they'll allow it. Peace needs more than one meeting. It needs people willing to return. And if they don't allow it? She asked softly. He smiled a little. Then I'll find a way. Humans are stubborn that way. She smiled too, though her heart ached. I think I'll miss that stubbornness. He looked down at her, and for a long moment neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of crystal flowers, and the suns reflected in their eyes. There were 1,000 words she wanted to say, but only one rose to her lips. Elias, thank you for teaching me that fear can be unlearned. He nodded slowly. And thank you for proving that courage isn't about fighting. It's about trusting someone when you shouldn't. A voice from the ship called his name. It was time to leave. He turned slightly, but she reached out, her hand trembling as it touched his arm. It was a simple touch, soft and human, and yet it carried everything she couldn't say aloud. Goodbye, Captain, she whispered. He placed his hand gently over hers. Not goodbye, Princess, just until next time. He stepped back and walked toward the ramp, but before entering he turned once more. His eyes met hers from across the courtyard. He raised his hand in a small, respectful salute, not as a soldier to royalty, but as one friend to another. Lyrene stood still as the engines came to life. The roar filled the sky, and light spilled across the marble floor. As the ship lifted into the air, her eyes followed it until it vanished into the bright clouds. The courtyard grew quiet again. The wind brushed her hair as she whispered to the empty sky, Safe travels, human. Later that night, she stood again in the royal garden beneath the ancient silver tree. The stars glittered above, and the city lights shone like jewels. She thought of everything that had happened, the fear, the battle, the healing, and the understanding. It felt like a story from another lifetime. The tree above her rustled softly, and for the second time a golden bloom opened among its branches. She smiled through the quiet. You kept your promise, she murmured. Her father joined her there, walking slowly. You changed much, my daughter, he said. Perhaps this peace will last because of you. She turned toward him, her eyes shining. No, father. Because of us. Because of courage, both Elari and human. He nodded with pride and left her alone under the glowing branches. Lyrene lifted her gaze to the sky once more. Somewhere far beyond the stars, she knew Elias's ship was cutting through the dark toward Earth. And though light years separated them now, she felt no distance, only connection. She no longer feared the unknown. She had touched it, trusted it, and found something greater than fear. Something that might one day bring two worlds together. And for the first time, Princess Lyrene smiled not as a ruler, but as someone who had finally found peace.